Here we go again. No. Here we go again. Today we're back. We have another mock draft, my second on the channel. Today, you know, it should be interesting. Couple bad teams won, so it's kind of messed it up a little. Saints are at 2. Browns lost, Jets won. I mean, Miami won. Like, these are QB needy teams too. So let's just get into it. So now, I've seen a lot of traction at 1-1 for the Titans this week with Arvell Reese. Now, I view Reese as a top 5 player in the class personally, so I could definitely see that possibility of him going, as high as, let's say, 3, but, like, in this scenario, the Giants wouldn't do that. You know, the Saints need a guy like him too. He's an edge rusher, just like Bain. I think they're very interchangeable on who could go 1, but I think Bain is still my number 1 player here, and the Titans need a game changer like Bain or Reese, and Bain's my pick. Now, the Saints. I think I said Mendoza last week. I'm going to stick with it again. I view Simpson very closely to Mendoza, but for all intents and purposes, Mendoza's still my guy. His arm strength, I mean, what a beautiful final drive last game to beat Penn State. He's definitely my number 1 guy on the board. Now, this is kind of where it gets interesting because I could really see the Giants do a bunch of things. In reality, I'm not going to predict a trade, but this is a spot where you could totally trade down. Now, 2 things I really could see them doing. Reese doesn't make sense because they have Carter and Burns locked up. Now, Downs is 1, and the second would be Tyson. Now, I know they have neighbors. I know, Wandale's good, Slayton's okay, but I really think Tyson is a game changer with his playmaking. I know he's been hurt, the QB's been hurt, but he's still just such a beast, man. He's my clear wide receiver 1 at this time. But my pick, I'm going to go with, Caleb Downs. I mean, this guy is an athletic freak. He could play. I think he could play corner. He could play safety. He's, a great locker room guy. He'll probably be a captain, as a rookie. And they need somebody on that defense, a leader like that, to, get the guys going. Now the Browns are a weird one too. I really don't. I really love the fit for Simpson in New York, so it's kind of like I don't want the Browns to take him. But in reality, I think the pick. I can't see them. Although Reese is interesting, I cannot see them avoiding taking Simpson here. He's just. I mean, he's on pace, to be probably top 2 in the Heisman. It's him and Mendoza for me. I mean, Simpson's my definite pick on this one. Although, I'm not sure how well he does there compared to the Jets. The Jets is literally just a beautiful fit for me. Um, so now, yeah, I mean and the Browns, they need receiver. Tyson makes sense. Fano makes sense, but Fano at 4, not really gonna do it. Reese again could definitely go there, but all right, pick 5. Now, this is probably my big surprise so far. I'm actually going to go with Reese. I don't love the fit with Dante Moore in New York as much as Simpson or Mendoza. Like I said, I think Reese is a top 5 player in the class. You could put him as high as 3. I think with Downs too. He's just he's another elite, Ohio State prospect. They need a guy on that defense to lead them. I know the quarterback concern is there. But you also have, besides pick 5, you have 4 other first-round picks this year and next. This year, you have 1. You have the Colts one at 32. You could definitely take a quarterback. You still have your second-round pick. You could easily take, a quarterback with that one too. So right here, I'm gonna go Arvell Reese. I think this dude is. I mean, he's been climbing up the boards. He was, 15-ish. He was 10-ish. Now he's top five. Yeah, he's just dominating. And now the Raiders. Now the Raiders make a lot of sense for Dante Moore, and the Raiders could also use Jordan Tyson, and they really could use Fano. And in theory, they could really use Peter Woods. My pick here, I mean, I have to go Moore because the QB need is more glaring than anything else on this team. I know, the offensive line has struggled, the receiving core, obviously you trade Myers. Tyson would be so big, but the depth in receivers in this class is so good that I think they could get another one in the second, even later. I know, they used a decent pick on Beck last year, but they need to, hit a guy. And I think Pete Carroll, whoever he takes here, if they end up going quarterback, he's probably tied at the hip with them. And if they're not good, Pete Carroll's out of town. And I hope for whoever they take or Dante Moore in the scenario that Chip Kelly isn't the OC because he's just on an offensive play caller for the NFL level, in my opinion. So now Miami's interesting because if you look at team needs, I know QB. Sellers isn't in play for me here. I put Sellers a little higher last time because I did think the Browns could I think I put him right around here because the Browns own the Jags pick too. I think that's a really strong possibility that Sellers because of just how he is as a prospect. He's just such a dynamic player. I don't think he's going to come out of college at this current time, but if he does, I definitely think he'll go first round somewhere. The Rams is interesting. Stafford's 38. The Steelers another interesting one. I mean, you could keep going with a couple teams too. I mean, I know Carolina won't, but Bryce, I don't think is the guy anymore. I held out hope, but the Jets have picked 32 too, so you never know. Hey, Lamar went 32 once, so. But all right, let me continue. Miami, they're in an interesting spot. I'm not sure Tua's the guy, but I don't think they're gonna get rid of him personally. I know how bad he's been. I think that you could really go a couple ways here. Brees off the board, Baines off the board. I don't, I could see Peter Woods. I could see Kedrick Falk. But I really could see Tyson. I know Waddle's 27, but Hill won't play next year, I don't think. You're trying to give whoever your quarterback is a lot of weapons for when he's coming into the league. They could still take a quarterback, sometime this year. I don't think Ewers or Zach Wilson is the answer for them at quarterback. Tua might not be either, but he's definitely, serviceable for the time being. They need some more playmakers on that team, and I think Tyson's the guy to do it. I think, like I said earlier, he's a super dynamic player. I think he's the best, weapon in the class. And that's saying something too. I mean, even in games without his quarterback, he's been such a big factor. But Achane, Tyson, I know they got Waddle, but Tyson's, I view as that, Waddle's like a lower tier wide receiver one. Tyson's that upper tier that they want. So that's my pick there. Now Washington is also in an interesting scenario because they really could go a bunch of picks here. If Tyson's on the board, I think that's a real possibility. You could clearly see they need edge, defensive line. I think the pick here is Falk. He just makes a lot of sense. He's not Reese or Bain, but he's pretty damn good. They really need, you could make the claim for Fano here. You could make the claim for him. You could make the claim for Tate. Any of the three, I don't think are out of the question for them. Debo's 30, McLaurin's 30. They're both injury prone. Laramie Tunsil's been shit. But the big thing on that defense, Dan Quinn is a defensive-minded coach. He needs an edge rusher. I think Falk's, a really good one. I think that's the pick. Now, Cincy. Now, as much as I want to say offensive line, and maybe they should take offensive line anyway, even, with whatever I'm saying. I think Peter Woods is the pick here. They really haven't had an interior defender like that, like elite level. I think Peter Woods is really good. Plus, he's playing like fullback. I know I said this last week, but it's absolutely insane. Um, since Geno Atkins, genuinely, like that's the last like big guy at defensive tackle for Cincy that has been elite level. I think Peter Woods is a great pick here, and I think that's who they go with. Now, the Rams, I mean, God, I'd be worried if they take Tate, but I think this one's, a simpler one. I mean, I know I said Sellers earlier, but I think Fano was just the pick. It's a team where they really need, an offensive lineman. Havenstein's, injury prone and older. Left tackle has been, inconsistent. That's just, that's a good time to, take tackle. Even though I could see them take Tate, and it would actually scare me shitless. Because when JSN was drafted, nobody really thought he would go to the Seattle. People thought they'd take a receiver, but they never thought they'd take one in the first round when they had Lockett and DK, and neither on the team anymore, by the way. So now the Cardinals is a hard one to say because they could totally take quarterback. I think Kyler's time there is done. They need offensive line, but it's more on the interior side. I know Jonah Williams is a free agent, but I can't make the assumption that he's going to leave. So, Paris Johnson, he's locked up for another 2 years. But, Jonah Williams, obviously a free agent. They could take Moaga or Proctor or even Tate. Tate, Marv, and McBride would be fucking crazy. But if you already can't get Marv the ball, I'm not sure that's the guy to go with. I think, I know it's a little bit of a reach at 11. Some people might have him a bit later, but I think Jeremiah Love's the pick here. I mean, if anyone saw that run he had the other day, oh my own, that was fucking crazy. I don't know how he scored that, bro. And then Henderson tried to recreate it, basically, right? Like, I mean, that was an incredible play. I think, what they're missing right now, since James Conner got hurt, is that dynamic running back. Benson, he's an okay player. Without Benson, DeMercado, Michael Carter, Bam Knight. I mean, they're all replaceable level players. Like, you could put Latavius Murray back there, and he'd probably do more than them. Now, if you want a dynamic runner, you got a decent offensive line. It's not, I'm not saying it's great, and they definitely need to make additions. But I think Jeremiah Love behind, whatever quarterback you got, you need that guy, and I think he makes a ton of sense for them. So that's my pick. Like I said, Tate, Mawaga, if Jonah Williams is gone, they make sense. Yes. Tate, I mean, it's hard to say. They'd use another one when their quarterback situation's a little uncertain. I think running back just makes a lot of sense there. With whatever they do, I'm not sure. Brissett's just look better than Kyler. We'll see though. They could also have a new coaching staff and stick with their guy. So, pick 12. Pick 12. Now, there's a couple different guys here because Dallas is an interesting situation where they really need defense. But, I believe George Pickens, his contract is, done after next year. So, could Cornell Tate be in picture? I totally think so. Sellers, no. Mawaga, no. Proctor, no. They don't really need offensive line. The big two here, it's Delane or McCoy. I know I said McCoy was better last time. I mean, it's kind of a flip-flop, like I said. They have both been, having doing their thing this year, and I think Delane's the pick. They've gone with the LSU corners before, right? Um, with what's his name, Morris Claiborne, I believe. I think that's who it is. Hopefully he's a bit better though. Claiborne was fucking horrible. Okay, let's move on. Now we've got Baltimore. Now Baltimore was at 10. I mean, I know they're just going to keep rising up. So it's hard to mock a team like this. But for all purposes, I mean, I could totally see offensive line. Proctor makes sense. Moag makes sense. Jermod McCoy makes sense. Edge rusher makes sense. I'm gonna stick with what I said last week. I think a receiver would be really good. Bateman just isn't it. He's a decent player. He's a wide receiver 3 or 4. Andrews 30. Zay Flowers is good, but you need that one for Lamar. If he's ever gonna win the Super Bowl for you, you got to get yourself a number one option. And I think that's Tate. I think that's Lemons in that area, and I think Tyson obviously is. So moving on. Now Minnesota, they don't really need offensive line. They made a bunch of good moves on the offensive line in the offseason. I know Dallas Turner's had his problems. I don't really see that happening. Here, I don't think they take an edge rusher either. I mean, cornerback makes a lot of sense. When you're relying on Isaiah Rodgers a lot, I know he's had his insanity, but that is a guy who's been released in practice squad and whatnot. McCoy is a really good talent, and I think this is like like I had Delane 2 picks before. I think this is just a great fit. With Brian Flores, he might not be the coach at the end of the season, or going into next season. I mean, at the because he might be a head coach somewhere else, but I think that makes a lot of sense for him there. So 15. Now, if the Texans don't take an offensive lineman, C.J. Stroud should request a trade. I might have said that last week too. I mean, you can't watch that team play and say anything else. It's truly disgusting how bad they've supported 2 top picks, because David Carr had one of the worst offensive lines ever, and he was one of the most sacked quarterbacks ever, besides like Andrew Luck. And now C.J. Stroud is given the same shitty treatment. I mean, it's Padre franchise just they kind of just do that shit. It's unfortunate, but if you don't take Moaga here, I think Proctor's very close in that argument too. I think but I'm just gonna go with Moaga here. It's hard to rate a lot of these guys because without the pro day too, or the combine, because like Will Campbell, he was given a lot of stick last year, and even the year before, because of his arm length. And obviously he's been really good at left tackle from day one, so it's not really a big issue for them. But all these guys can move up, move down. So now moving on, pick 16. I had Tate last week for them. Sorry. I'm gonna stick with something similar to that. Their needs: corner, receiver, safety, tackle. I don't have a huge problem with our offensive line right now. Sellers doesn't make sense. I don't really think edge rushers, a big, the super need here. I think receiver, a number 2 guy. If you're ever gonna get Bryce to get better, you can't just throw him to the wolves with Coker, Leggett, Jatavion Sanders. These guys just aren't gonna do it. Like, they're all just replaceable level players. They haven't really shown anything. So I think getting an elite player like Lemon, who's 1 and 2 in this class are really good, but he's definitely up there too. and he could definitely rise. We'll see what the playoffs does for him. So now another one where it's if Casey picks at 17, I'll buy a lottery ticket. This is just never gonna happen. But in all purposes, I'm gonna just be realistic. I don't, I know it says edge rusher, but I think the big need, Love is off the board here, corner. I mean, you could take Terrell, but I think you need offensive line because I know their offensive line has really struggled this year. I think Proctor makes a ton of sense. Like I said, he's pretty close for me with Mowaga. Um, and it's like Josh Simmons and Jawan Taylor just have their fair share of problems. I think this is just a great um, value pick here as well. It's kind of mocking an offensive tackle is always boring, but sometimes it's got to be what you do. Like the Pats last year, I bet most of their fans didn't want them to take Will Campbell at 4. They wanted whatever Abdul Carter, Travis Hunter. I know these guys went before, but I don't think many people expected Hunter to go at 2. In all reality. So even Tet, for the Pats too, and he went 8, right? So now San Fran, offensive line is a really really strong possibility. The other one for me is that edge rusher. They've really had their I keep saying fair share of problems there, but when every player on your team at that position is injured, you start to run into a slight issue. Um, Now Bosa, he's in an injury again. Michael Williams out for the season. He wasn't that good. I know, but you need to attack the quarterback. They got Salah back. He's running that defense superbly. I think T.J. Parker's a great pick here. I could also see. I know he's a little farther down. Anthony Hill. I raved about him last week too. I think he's just an elite, tackler, and he's just such a good player. I think that just makes a ton of sense at that pick. But T.J. Parker's the guy I'm gonna go with. I think he's just an edge above, David Bailey for now. I know Clemson is, struggling, but yeah, that's just the guy to go with here. Just I'm yapping too much here sometimes. Now the Browns, see, we took a quarterback with them, so it's a little different on this one. Now the argument, edge rusher, I'm not gonna go there. I mean, if I was gonna take an edge rusher, I would have took Orville Reese. I don't think they're gonna do that. I totally could see them taking Reese, but I don't see them taking an edge rusher after taking a quarterback. I think right here, I think Denzel Boston makes a lot of sense. You get a quarterback, you want to give him a weapon, you need to give him a 1. Jerry Jeudy's not doing it. Harold Fannin, great talent at tight end. That's a good guy for your quarterback for 6-8 years, let's say. Boston, perfect guy. I view him, at that wide receiver 1 caliber. I have Chris Bell right around there. Conception, he's been good. Brazell, he might be a little lower. You still have Bernard and a couple other guys down there. But I think the pick here, it's a little boring, but I think you need to get left tackle. There is a glaring hole every week I watch Red Zone, and the Browns left tackle is just absolutely killing Gabriel. I know Gabriel's a shit can, but this just makes a lot of sense. Conklin, they got, left guard, right guard, center, that's all clean. Right tackle, like I said, Conklin's pretty good. He's, a Pro Bowl, All-Pro caliber guy. Lomu makes a ton of sense. They've been missing somebody there since Wills left because of injury. Now, the Pittsburgh Steelers. Again, this is kind of a weird one. because they could totally take Sellers. They could, but you know, I'm not a fake demon, man. But I got some hate in the comments last time, because I predicted Newsmeyer to go to the Steelers. You know, Newsmeyer probably not a first round pick, looking back at it, but especially after I watched him against Bama. He cannot read the pocket whatsoever. It's pretty bad. I don't think Sellers, uh, like, Sellers makes a lot of sense, but I don't think they're the team for him because Arthur Smith would absolutely kill him. So I'm gonna stick with what I think makes a lot more sense. Joey Porter, he's been good, but you got to get a better corner. Darius Slay, he said he's going to retire after this year. Jalen Ramsey, you got him playing safety. Um, I think Terrell makes a ton of sense. I just think this is a perfect pick. Although I could see Sadiq too. I think Terrell just makes more sense based on what they need on defense. They just love drafting like defensive players. Um, so yeah. Now we have the Dallas Cowboys again. So obviously, earlier I took Menser Delane. They grade me an A. Always nice to see. Um, I'll look at the rest of these later. Um, but the glaring need, after the Parsons trade, um, you need an edge rusher bad. David Bailey does make sense here. They could have taken him the last pick. Cassius Hell makes sense. Sonny Styles, kinda, but the edge rusher need is a lot more pressing. I think David Bailey's a good pick here. I think that's the guy. And now you got the Bears. The Bears who, listed at RB, but I like Monangai. So, I don't think, that's really going to happen. Edge rusher's a big need. They were looking super hard for it at the deadline. Offensive line, you could go with D-line, corner. I don't view another, Colton Hood's arguably a first-round pick, but besides that, not really. I think Sonny Styles, is a possibility here. But my pick's going to be, it's kind of between, Cassius Howell and Ugala Boogala. And I think Howell's a better prospect. I'm not being biased because I don't like DJ, but, he's, so. But we'll see. We'll see how the season ends for him. So, now the Buffalo Bills. Now the Bills, it's going to suggest, what the fuck? It's going to suggest Sellers for some reason. It's going to suggest Sadiq. I mean, Kincaid's had a way better year. I don't think this is even in the question for me. Sonny Styles, kind of. Why is it projecting Newsmeyer, dude? The pick here, I mean, this is simple as day. If you've watched a single quarter of any Bills game this season, you know they need a receiver, and you know they need one bad. Keon Coleman looks terrible. Shakir is not doing it this year either. They are really, hurting their chances. Like I said with the Ravens, you need a wide receiver one if you ever want to beat Pat Mahomes. This is another chance to get a wide receiver one. I think Boston is definitely wide receiver 4 in the class. And I think that's just, the way to go. So, Tampa Bay. Now, Tampa Bay is in an interesting scenario because Mike Evans, you don't know what's going to happen with him. Chris Godwin, we don't know what's going to happen with him. There's two different things I could go here. Ugala Boogala. But I'm going to go, a little different. And I think this guy, I know this guy doesn't, stack the stat sheet. But I think Kenyon Sadiq is the pick. I mean, Auden is, an okay guy, but I think he's just another, mediocre, Cameron Brate, Noah Fant type guy. He's not doing enough, I think you need a game changer like this with Baker, you'd have a, like, let's say Godwin and Evans. You need to give your quarterback support, because when Evans got injured, you could see, like, I mean, anyone could see that shit. They don't have a number two. I like Tez Johnson. I do. I love Bo Nix. He's half brother, whatever. But you need to get another guy for your quarterback. If you're, again, if you want to win a Super Bowl, you got to give your quarterback weapons. And Kenyon Sadiq is a great weapon, and I think he's the pick here. So, I think, his combine, like another guy. Sadiq, I think his combine and his pro day, build his stock a lot, honestly. So, yeah. They view tight end as the third biggest need for the Lions, but I mean, there's no other pick for me here besides, well, I guess you could go inside offensive line, but they don't even view it as that. But I mean, I know what they need, because they need somebody across Hutchinson. They have kind of struggled with that. So that's kind of an easy one to just go through, because you just know they need a guy. It's pretty much who falls there. And then the Chargers at 26, they're just out of it because they don't have they just miss out on every edge rusher. I mean, they could, like, linebacker, it says they need. It's kind of down there. I mean, I don't think they need a linebacker that bad. I think what they do need is an inside offensive lineman. This is the best one of the class. Ione, if my pronunciation is wrong, I'm sorry. But he's definitely the best guy in the class. Becton has really not looked that good. Pipkins is okay. It's not really doing it. Um, you know, Alt has been hurt. Slater's hurt all year. I think you got to get your quarterback some help up front. Just keep him healthy. Remember what happened to Andrew Luck. Let's not you know let's not forget about it. Now the Rams, again, this is another interesting spot, because the Rams again could take Lenore Sellers here. I don't think they will. I know they view it as the top need, but I really think Sonny Styles is a really elite player. I do think Anthony Hill, like I said, is definitely in the picture here. I think Sonny Styles is the better player right now, and I think that's who they go with. So now the Pats. Now if the Pats, yeah. So you're telling me the two top suggestions for the Pats are Sellers and Newsmeyer. Yeah. Okay. I see. Personally, I don't really agree with that. Um, I don't even know where they get this shit, bro. Like, what are we talking about? Linebacker. Let's look at their needs, or what it says. Receiver, safety, obviously. Inside offensive lineman, linebacker, RB. If they take RB, Pats fans will not be happy. I can tell you that one. Now, I'm gonna go receiver here because I think they need a one. I'm not. He's a really weirdly built receiver, Chris Bell. Um, he is the size of a linebacker and he moves like a running back. His speed is really, really crazy. And I think he'd be a perfect guy for Drake May. He loves that deep ball and he's just an elite player, man. He's just gonna keep rising as time goes on. Seattle. Seattle could definitely go receiver, and I know Conception's on the list. Torrey Horton's looked good though, so I'm not gonna go with him there. I think Woolen's look better, so I'm not gonna go with him either. I'm gonna go. I think this is where you go with Anthony Hill. I think they had Bobby Wagner. He was an elite tackler. I think this is where you go. Anthony Hill here. C.J. Allen's definitely in question, but I think Hill is going to be higher on the board by the time the year's done. So now we move on to my team. I got the two jerseys behind me. I'd love an offensive weapon, of course, but unfortunately, they also need linebacker, corner. No, edge rusher. I guess. Quarterback, no. I think this is where you go Conception. Now, I'm seeing a lot of, a rise in his stock lately. Deservedly so, because he's had a really good year. Marcel Reed's had a really good year. I think this makes a lot of sense in Denver. Um, Conception, I believe, was at NC State before too, which is pretty cool. They need a weapon. Like I mean, I could keep saying it. Um, if you want to win a Super Bowl and if you want to beat Patrick Mahomes, you got to give your quarterback more and more help. They need a wide receiver too. Anyone could see that shit. They need a second option for Bo Nix if they want him to progress to a better player. Conception makes a lot of sense. AB comparisons, Tyler Lockett. He's just an elite route runner and a really, really good player. Honestly, like, I think I said this before, but him and Bell are very interchangeable. Um, you know, he's obviously going to be in the tournament. Bell might be too in the college football playoffs, but and that could change their stock. So I don't think that's much of a reach, although I could totally see Denver take linebacker, unfortunately. But so the Philadelphia Eagles. Now they really need corner, bro. But I don't want to leave the Georgia player off the board too, because they love their Georgia Bulldogs, and they do need linebacker kinda. But I do think corner's a bigger need here. So I'm gonna go Colton Hood. They've really struggled. I mean, they had Adoree Jackson playing. They had Jair Alexander, who just left the team. So yeah, Colton Hood would be a good guy to take. Obviously, you have Quinyon Mitchell as the nickel. DeJean, they like playing him anywhere, bro. He's such a beast. Yeah. So now we move on. Now we have the Jets for the second time on here. Of course, I took Arvell Reese. Only a B plus, a little mean. But they do need quarterback. They do need a cornerback. They need offensive line. They kind of need a good amount of anything. They're not there yet. I do like C.J. Allen a lot. Like I said, he could have easily gone at 31. I know we already took linebacker, but I view Reese as an edge rusher more than linebacker, so it's not really that big of a concern for me. I do think they could take Sellers, although I think it's more likely that they wait a year and they'll take like Drew Aller or Klubnik or some other like fourth round quarterback, really. So I think in all reality, I think C.J. Allen makes a lot of sense here. I think this is a good pick. So that's all I got from that one. So let's I want to see what the grades I got here. A. Oh, Falcons don't pick. They're poor fans. A. A again. A. I want to see if they did poorly on a lot of these. A plus and an A. Nice. A and an A plus. Broncos. A. A. Oh, Packers don't have a pick, right? A plus. Nice. Colts don't have a pick, of course. Jags don't have a pick, of course. Chiefs only a B plus on Proctor. Wow. Raiders A plus. I mean, I think if he's gonna be good somewhere, he's probably gonna be good in Las Vegas. I don't know why, but it's just like what I think. A and A, nice. The Chargers in A. Some of these are just boring picks. I mean, dude, Tyson at a B plus a fucking joke, man. They'd probably rather I take Sellers. That's the thing. Like, I don't get it, bro. A plus on Jermard McCoy, awesome. Pats A plus as well. New Orleans Saints A plus. I mean, how can you give me any lower? Okay, A really. B plus on both, bro. They really would have rather me took Sellers there. And Hood. Steelers A. Niners B plus only. BS. B. Oh my God, I'm joining the Anthony Hill fan club. I'm not kidding. A plus. I mean, if you give me lower than that on the best player in the class, arguably, I'd be pretty upset. No, not bad. So if we go here, yeah. I mean, this is what I think. You know, it's only what is it? This sorry, November 12th. So we have a good 6 months until then. So a lot could change, of course. I mean, Love could definitely move up too. A lot of these guys, these are tournament teams. You know, Oregon, Ohio State, Bama. A lot of these guys, their stock can change. So nothing's nothing's really, holy hell, nothing's set in stone at this time. It's a shame like Boston won't make it, or like these Clemson guys, because you got some elite defenders on Clemson, bro. So you know this is an elite receiver class. Got a lot of good linebackers and defensive ends. So yeah, let me know what y'all think. I hope I didn't upset anybody with this one. I think I did a bit better than last time. Um, I studied some film and shit, so I think I'm on it. I'll see you on the next one. Peace.